Hello and welcome to this video on growing hops. Hops are needed for beer, and while commercial supplies are readily available, some niche varieties can be hard to source. In other cases, you may wish to save some money and use that for equipment, more of other ingredients, or to simply save a little. Fortunately, hops are relatively straightforward to grow, but they do take a little finesse and some awareness of the environment in which you are growing them. Hops will grow from a rhizome. This is similar to how ginger and rhubarb grow. It is a large root found underground, and it acts like a permanent seed that will grow back, or a tree that grows back from a stump. Hops grow as a vine, but not quite. It's something called a bine, that's vine spelt with a B instead. This is because it does not use tendrils like a vine does, but small, hooked hairs that keep it attached to wires, string, and other material that suspend the plant. Hops grows with two flowers. These are a male and female flower. Each will appear on a different plant. Only the female flower cone is used in commercial brewing. Most commercial hops plantations will remove male plants. This is so they don't fertilize the female cone. Now that you know what the hops plant looks like, let's start on choosing where to plant your vine in the first place. The environment is important. You need to be aware of the fact that hops must enter a period of dormancy. Without this, you won't get very good growth come spring. This means your winter must be cold enough that it puts the vine into dormancy. After that occurs, you'll get a lot of vigorous growth, and that growth is what's needed for the development of a canopy, which in turn will give you the large yield of flowers. While the environment itself can be a little bit finicky, the hops itself can grow in a very wide range of soil types. This is everything from light sandy soil through to clay. That means that you can grow it just about anywhere that has a suitable temperate environment that gets cold in winter. In order to get the best growth, as with most things though, you want to have a deep soil that is well manured and given plenty of fertilizer. It also needs to drain freely. This means you retain enough moisture to keep the plant going, but not so much water that it becomes waterlogged and goes to rot. The next factor in location is wind. Hops, because they grow on a large vine-like structure, can be very susceptible to wind. Not only can this damage the plant by breaking off leaves and large stems, but it'll also destroy the laterals. The laterals are where you'll get your flowers and cones from. Because of this, you need to be aware of the fact that your area, if it has a high wind or a strong wind coming from one particular direction, you should provide protection. The hops itself are vigorous and well growing in all environments that are suitable because it has a very deep root. The roots will go a long ways down, and that's how they'll draw up their nutrition and water. The problem with this is that although they go quite a ways down, the actual nutritional portion will only be sucked in from the top soil. This means that if you are in an area that gets extremely dry, especially in that top soil layer, the feeder roots may not be able to get the moisture needed. And that's going to be a problem for you. You'll need to keep up the moisture by providing some sort of irrigation. Once you've planted out the hops plant itself, you can then look at how you're going to propagate it. Propagation's done a few different ways. The most common is to take a rhizome. The rhizomes are the small shoots that can be taken from the crown, much like a rhubarb plant, and these get cut into sections. After being allowed to dry for a short period, they can be planted directly into the soil, and they'll begin to grow from there. Most rhizome cuttings are going to be between 10 and 15 centimeters long, and have several nodes. The other option is to use softwood propagation, and this is to take green cuttings. They are short sections of the living plant, and it is a way to clone it. Cloning in this case is actually advantageous if you already know the sex of the plant. Is it producing male or female flowers? Doing this also lets you produce a lot of plants much more quickly. It's done in ways that are very similar to other means we've demonstrated with bonsai. You take a single cutting in spring or through to summer in some cases, depending on which particular variety. Cuttings should be taken only once there are axillary buds, that is, further buds developing at each leaf node. You can then add rooting hormone if you so wish, or plant them directly into some sort of growing medium. From here, once they're established, you can transfer them into pots and grow them on. Once they're established and they have a rhizome of their own, you can plant them in the ground and this becomes a new plant. It'll take roughly a year, and you need to do so after the risk of frost has passed. Once you have plants that are established and growing, you can look at harvesting. One of the easiest means is to simply use the cuttings as mentioned, grow them up, and this is how you get your plants to strike. It also maximizes the yield. In order to get the best out of these plants, you need to wait until spring when the first shoots begin to emerge from the hop crown. This will be what we've shown you earlier in this video, those small growths that are appearing. They are what are going to produce your plant. The growth from these will need to be trained onto strings or wire. This will give you a consistent canopy. The consistency is important, as not only will the consistency allow you to have plant growth across the entire length, but also it will produce flowers and then cones across the entire length. It makes it much easier to harvest and gives you a much more certain harvest. This is where the string becomes important, whether it's string, wire, or something similar. You want to have this set up before that growth occurs. The reason for it is simple. By wiring it up on string, you provide support in case of wind. You ensure that the vine spreads out over a large area and everything gets sunlight. Because everything's getting sunlight and you're also not overcrowding it, you can minimize the chances of things like mold developing within it. The number of lines of string or wires you'll need to set up will vary based upon different species and location. So your cultivar or hops may only require 2 strings, as is seen in some places, 4 in others, and even more in certain limited locations. Once you're well into the year, you'll find that your plant should begin to produce the cones, which is the whole point of all this process so far. The cones are useful, but you need to know when they're ready, and how to preserve them, although we'll talk about preserving in another video. Figuring out when they're ready can be the easier of the two. The first and simplest approach is to take a handful of them, crush them or roll them between your hands, and then smell them. If you've harvested them at the right time, you should find that the smell will go from being a grassy smell, which is very obvious. This is an indication that the cones are not yet ripe. If they're overripe or over-matured, they're going to smell like something similar to onion, sulfur, or garlic. You want to catch them at the moment between these two, and it can last from a week to a few days, and in some cases several weeks. It depends on your local conditions and how the plant is maturing, and the hops themselves are ripening. Once you've reached this right time, you can begin harvesting them by cutting them off of the vine, putting them to a side and letting them dry. Overall, hops, as said, are relatively easy to grow, but you need to know some of your local conditions and need to have a little bit of work done to make the environment and the plants ready to grow. Thank you for watching this video. If you found it interesting, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Please post any comments, questions, or suggestions that you have below.